Hey guys, welcome back to K Reviews Books. Today we're going to be going through your ultimate fantasy guide. I read a lot of romance now, but I started off my reading journey, my reading hobby, my reading lifestyle, originally reading fantasy romance. And I one day just went into a Barnes& and Noble, and my sister reads a lot, and this was about like 3 years ago, and I was like, I finished Game of Thrones and House of Dragons actually, and I was just like, I want to live there. Like, I need something to fill this void of I finished all of these and I was so upset, and I picked up Fourth Wing and I was like, this has dragons in it. I'll read it. What's the worst that happens? I don't like it and I give it to my sister, and I didn't finish the book. Who cares? I finished Fourth Wing within 2 days. And I, at that point, had not picked up a book since like high school. And I couldn't believe how much I absolutely loved this story. And I was like immediate. And it just so happened that the week prior to this, like when I read it, the next week, or Iron Flame was coming out. So I was like, oh my gosh. So I read both of those books within, 2 days, and I absolutely loved them. And that opened a can of worms for me. So I'm kind of going to give you like a play-by-play of all the books that I read. I'm going to give you book recs, and we're just going to kind of talk about fantasy and, where to start. Do we start with, romantasy, smutty romantasy, fade to black, YA? We're going to talk about all the books, all the genres, all the tropes of fantasy romance, and kind of just give you advice, where to start. If you're younger, we're going to maybe work into YA first, and then, if you're an adult and you don't know where to start, we're going to move into, where to start there. And fantasy can go from, simple sweet romance to even dark romance in fantasy genre, stuff like that. So let's get into the video. Getting into fantasy, there's so many different genres. Like I said earlier in my intro, there is YA fantasy, that's a fade to black kind of romance type deal. We have adult fantasy that is, there's adult themes like fighting and gory scenes, smut, stuff like that. And then we also have dark romance to fantasy tropes. There's different tropes within it. And then there's also a lot of fantasy books that are more political, and the romance portion of it is like a subgenre to the actual book itself. You only see little tidbits of the romance. And we're going to go through and show you all those books and book recommendations that are like that for me. There's a lot of popular books, and you need to remember that I'm just giving you my opinion of the books that I loved, and I won't be showing you fantasy books that I've read that I did not like. Fantasy is a scary place to go because, and this is something like if you haven't read it but you've seen TikToks about it, they talk about world building a lot and how it works. Whereas like romance, you go into it and you get to know the main two characters, their friends, what town they live in, but there's really nothing else. But in fantasy books, there's subworlds, made up worlds, the war between individuals, and all these things going on. So they're heavy on the world building and understanding of what's going on. And ACOTAR is like one of those perfect examples of like, we're going to explain everything to you in the first book, so that book kind of sucks, and then everything gets exciting and you understand everything. But it's just the initial, usually in most fantasy books, the world building can really deter a reader from reading the book. And I was big on that. And a lot of my friends who are bookish individuals have said, hey, I recommend you this book. You have to get through the first book though, like for it to get really good, but you just have to get through that hump of the first book. And so thankful for them, and hopefully I could be that person for you, when recommending a series. Sometimes the first book is just world building and you have to get through it to get to like the real good juicy parts of a fantasy book. So let's get into all things fantasy book recs. First things first, we're going to start off with YA fantasy, and I'm just going to kind of go through my recommendations, and I'll even talk about some of the books that I've read YA-wise that I DNF'd and or didn't like and or de-shelved from my personal library because I did not enjoy the book. But one of the first YA books I read after kind of getting into the genre is Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This story follows Kai and Peyton. They're participating in games. Peyton accidentally gets nominated because she saves someone in the village that she's in, and the townspeople think that she's a perfect fit. And all of these individuals have power, and the people who do not live in these like lower income living kind of homeless vibe, because they're not elite born. And so Peyton gets nominated to participate in these games, which she also faces the princes in this book. And the series is so good. Actually, the next book in the series comes out on the 8th of April this year, and I'm super excited for it. It is the last book, and I'm nervous because if you read the second book, you'll know why. But Powerless is a YA. It's kind of romance related. It's a romantasy, I would say. So Peyton goes into this with no power, but she has to hide that fact from everyone else because if you don't have power, they kill you. And so this story is just like super fun, super cool. Kind of reminds me of like, I guess kind of like Hunger Games, but like with powers, if that makes sense. And it's super good. I absolutely loved it. This is like something that isn't heavy on the world building because it's only a trilogy and there's really not a lot to know other than, you know, the elites versus the non-elites, how the games work, and, you know, the dynamics of the individuals. So there is 3 books in this series and a novella about her best friend. So you'll meet her, and I think the novella falls in the time period of Powerless. And this story is just super good, but it's also heartbreaking, and, you know, you feel all the emotions of love, sadness, hard decisions, guilt, stuff like that. So this is a super easy story. It's a little bit thick. I think it's around 500 pages, but I think that this is kind of like an easy pickup read. It might take you like a week to finish this, but it's super easy to read. It's super fun. Honestly, I think even though I was super shocked in the second book, I think the first book was like the best so far. I think this is a great way to start. I know this is hefty, but let's get into something that's a little more lighter, page-wise, that, you know, you might really enjoy. And again, I know this is a big book, but don't let it deter you because the story itself is really fun to get through. But something a little less intimidating is Lightlark by Alex Aster. This story is kind of similar. It follows an island that appears every so often, and they compete in games. This is a love triangle romantasy series, and it was supposed to be a 3-book series, but I believe it's going to be a 5-book series, she announced. And there's different people that appear, and the 3 main characters are Aro, Grimm, and Isla, and they all compete in these games, and Aro falls in love with Isla, but also Grimm and Isla have a past. And you find out some really interesting things that just like want to break your heart and make you want to scream. And I actually was so mad reading the 3rd book that I almost DNF'd it, but I pushed through and I loved it. But I was so frustrated. But anyway, this series is super fun. The world building is a little more than Powerless, but it's not to the point where you're like, oh my god, like please make it end. You just have to get an understanding of how all the separate worlds work, and then how the island works, and how, you know, it appears every year, and how they compete, and how the rules work, and all that kind of stuff. So the half of this book is kind of like that kind of world building, but then you kind of get into the excitement of the games itself, and, you know, you start to learn all the characters and who can you trust and who can you not trust, who's a true friend and who's not, stuff like that. And this series is super fun. It's a little less than 400 pages, and I think like the problem with fantasy books is, even though if they're like a trilogy or a duology, they're still going to be a little bit thicker than like your typical romance, which is usually under like 300 pages. So don't let the page number intimidate you. Again, these books are are super easy to get into because they're originally supposed to be trilogies, but you know, they're not super insanely big to the point where it's like, oh my gosh, am I ever going to finish this story? You'll notice when you start reading these books, and especially if you get past the world building, you are just engulfed in this world. Like, I don't know about you, but I can see it in my mind when I'm reading. And then I know Alex Astor actually talks about this. She says that when she's writing these books or reading books that she can't see it in her head, but my imagination's like, I think pretty good, because I actually feel like there's times where I've been sitting on the couch reading a book and I'm so in the actual world itself that my fiance was talking to me or like, hey, what do you want to do for dinner or whatever, and I didn't hear a word he said because it's like I'm there, and it's so weird to say it out loud, but it's true. Like, I just can picture it so vividly while I'm reading the story. So Lightlark is a great book to kind of introduce yourself in. And again, this is a YA story. It's a fade to black. Anything that's particularly romance, you know, there's kissing, whatever, but any sort of smut it's non-existent in these books, which I personally think if the book is that good, it does not need smut. It does not need it. Like, this and Powerless, oh my god, I don't even need it. The slow burn love that are in these books, it doesn't, the story itself, it's just so great that you don't need that. You know, it's amazing. These stories are super cool and I absolutely love them. Next up is another book around 400 pages. This is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber, and I'm sure you've seen fan art of these two characters, Evelyn Fox and Prince of Hearts, and it is just so darn good. I absolutely loved this fantasy series. It's a trilogy, and she loved someone in the beginning of this series, and he's getting married to her sister, I believe. It's been a while since I've read these books, and she believes in love, like thoroughly believes in love. Like, one day she's going to find the love of her life, and she thought she did. And she finds the Prince of Hearts and asks him for help. And she discovers that throughout her journey with him and him helping her, that his story is actually really sad, that no one can love him and that he has accidentally killed the ones he loves because when they kiss him, they die. And this story is just so beautiful and you have to read it. Like, I didn't think I was gonna like this. And again, like, after reading Fourth Wing first, like, I was like, I have to have smut in books. But then I was like, wait, no, I don't actually. Because these slow burn, like, love stories are just so much more without it. It just makes you feel like, I don't know how to describe it. It makes you feel like young again. Like that first love, like, I don't know, like the first time, you know, it's beautiful. Like, these stories are so cool. And I absolutely love this story. And again, this is such a huge and popular book talk book that so many people I know have loved this story, and I'm included in that. These are so fun, so beautiful, and again, it's a trilogy, and the story is just so awesome. And again, it's a YA book. There's, you know, a little bit of world building in this because you kind of have to get an understanding of like where she's at in the beginning, how she ends up with the broken heart prince, and you know where they travel to help her. But again, it's kind of throughout you learn things. It's not like a hurry up info dump, you know, type of thing. And this story was cool, so darn cool, that again, I absolutely love it. I'm obsessed with it, and I have been searching for a while to get any sort of special edition of this series, and unfortunately I have yet to do that. Up is Divine Rivals. It's a duology. It's under 400 pages for both books, and this is kind of a political story, more or less. Romance, but the romance is kind of heavy, but not as heavy as like a romantasy book. This story is about Iris. She goes into the war as a journalist who is writing about the ongoing events in the war. Her brother goes missing. She starts writing him letters with this typewriter that came from her grandmother, and she gets letters back. It's not from her brother, and she wants to find out who it is. Well, as this story goes on, she eventually does find out who it is, and she's very shocked to find out who this is. An awesome story, and a lot of people actually do not like this story. I think at first when I read it, I was kind of like, you know, this isn't really my vibe. But after I thought about it, you know, the story is actually really good, you know, for what it is, a duology, lighthearted, kind of heartbreaking at times, but the story's really good. And like I said, the 2 books follow Iris going to war, being the journalist. She wants to be the top journalist. She wants to write the best work. And she's in competition with Roman Kit. He works for the opposing newspaper, and they're trying to get the top stories. And they both have to go on the front lines. And it's scary. So this story is really good. Again, less than 400 pages for both books. Super fun. Again, a 2-book series, so it's not too overwhelming. And I just think this story was super fun. Rebecca Ross like knows what she's doing when it comes to this, and it was such a fun read. But again, super heartbreaking. I think I cried a little bit while reading the second book. But yeah, this story was super fun, super lighthearted, and easy to follow. Again, a duology is a great way to start things because it could be overwhelming to pick up a book and know that there's 7 books that goes along with it. So this series, super good. Duologies or trilogies are always a great way to start, especially YA, because smut can be sometimes an uncomfortable thing to read. So YA is always a good way to start. And again, it's not super childish. I wouldn't read it if it is. There was a series that I get a lot of hate for hating on it. And it was just so childish. And what sent me over an edge was when they said they were walking into a JCPenney's. And if you know, you know, I won't name the book, but I could not physically continue that series. And it was only a trilogy, so I stopped. But not super childish, super cute, like makes you feel first love again. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like that warm, fuzzy feeling. You're like, oh my gosh, like, oh, that's so sweet. Like, and you are super into it. Lastly is Shatter Me. This series is my last recommendation for YA, and the reason it is last is because it is a 6-book YA series. The books, as you can see, aren't super thick. Again, I think they're under 400 pages. Yeah, they are. They're like around 330, 340 pages, but it's 6 books. And I think if you're really into YA fantasy, this is more like sci-fi-y. Juliet is the main character in this book, and she is trapped by Alex Warner in this series in a prison as a prisoner, and she starts to trust an old friend from school, and there's a lot of things going wrong. There's war, stuff like that, and Alex Warner and his team are trained by their fathers who were generals in the war at a young age because war is starting up again, right? And he has been basically a freaking animal his whole life, like a beast. And they just go through these issues, and Juliet is a little bit nutty, but she's also super smart when it comes to manipulation and things like that. And once she gets her strength throughout this series and realizes who the hell she is, shit gets crazy. But this series is super good. And again, the reason I recommend this last is because, again, you're going from a trilogy, duology, whatever, to a 6-book series. Super awesome. Alex Warner, I love you. I absolutely love this series. It was so stinking cool. And again, I didn't think I was going to be into the sci-fi aspect of this, but I am. And actually this month Watch Me is coming out, and everybody, I think this is like a jump into, because they're young, again, this is a YA series, it jumps into the future when they're older and stuff like that. So everybody's super excited for this to release, and I'm super excited for it to release. And yeah, this series is just unbeatable. I absolutely crushed this within days. Like, I think I finished it within 5 or 6 days, this whole series. I was infatuated with this series, and I would 100% recommend this. Like, after you get used to the style of, you know, YA fantasy and how the duologies and trilogies do things, I think picking up Shatter Me series is something that you should absolutely do. And again, don't let all the books intimidate you. This story is so crazy. There's just constantly stuff going on and going on and going on that it doesn't even feel like 6 books. Next up is a duology I want to recommend that's a little more political based. This is something that she's hefty, okay? She's about 400 to 500 pages, and this series is awesome. The best way that I describe this series is the romance is a little on the back burner, but the story itself is so good. Have you ever seen Venom with Tom Hardy? This book is the female version of that. She has a creature in her mind because there was this big issue with some sort of breakout where it killed a bunch of people, but she somehow survived it, and this parasite is in her head talking to her, and she gets like powers from it and stuff. It is so crazy. This story is so good that like it didn't even matter to me that there was no romance. Well, there is romance in it, but it's not significant enough to be that important. This story is absolutely crazy. It's only a duology. I wished it was longer. This story was so stinking good. This is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillage, and it is just a series of the century. Honestly, a duology of the century, I guess I should say, not a series. But this story, if you want to, you know, branch out and kind of put the romance on the back burner, even if the romance really doesn't interest you all that much, this is the series. I keep saying series. This is the duology to start into more of a political fantasy story. This was so good. I recommend this book to literally anybody and everybody. All of my friends have read this series, and this is so good. I don't have words. Like I said, it is like the female version of Venom, and she is just a badass, and she does not care. She does her thing, and nothing's gonna stop her. And this story is just awesome. You have to read this. Next up, we're gonna be talking about big book series. And where do you start? Things first is my holy grail, my ride or die, I will die for you, Xaden series. Fourth Wing is about a girl named Violet whose mother is super prominent in the Basgath College, which is a war college. Training facility. She grew up thinking that her whole life she was going to be a scribe like her dad, and some unfortunate events happen in her life which causes her to have to take the path as a writer. And Violet goes through some hell and back to get where she is today, and this series is so cool. There is dragons, there is spicy romance, and this series is what got me completely into fantasy books. I will go to my grave saying this is the best work of fantasy writing I've ever read that includes smut. This series has broke boundaries for me that are just indescribable. This series, Onyx Storm, I cried for like a week and a half straight. Fourth Wing, I reread this book 4 times after I read it because I was in such a slump, and I absolutely loved it that much that I could not escape from this world that I lived in while reading Fourth Wing. And this series is just unmatched compared to other series, I think personally. I absolutely loved Fourth Wing. I think you will too. This is a 5-book series. There's only 3 books out right now. It is not fully complete, and at this moment, Rebecca Yarros is taking 2 years off. So, Fourth Wing, again, my favorite series of all time. I absolutely loved it. Onyx Storm I finished within, I think, 16 hours, which is absolutely insane. I get that, but I'm a fast reader, and you will learn that. I am very quick, but I absolutely love this series, and this is a great way to start into a bigger series. But the only thing that sucks right now is that it is incomplete. So if you're looking for a complete series, this is not for you. But this series is so amazing, and honestly, I wouldn't say to just not read it at all. I know it sucks to wait, but this is worth the wait. You know what I'm saying? Like, this series is so darn good. I love it. Love it. I am just super biased. Anything Fourth Wing and Rebecca Yarros. Next up is the next book that I started after I read Fourth Wing, and I know, super crazy that I read a only 2-book series that isn't complete yet and then immediately jumped into something that also isn't complete yet, is ACOTAR, or A Court of Thorns and Roses. This is one of those stories that I said, you know, it's a lot of world building, there's a lot of nonsense, and you're super confused 90% of the first book, but the ending is super fun and it gets you really into wanting to read the next book. But the first half of this book, or more or less first like 75% of this book, is a lot of just nonsense, and you just are like, what the hell are you talking about, Sarah? And this series is so good. So far we have 4 legitimate books and 1 novella, and this series is just one of those series that is completely unmatched. No one will ever write something as good as this series. And Farah is the FMC in this book. Farah is helping her family because her dad hurt his leg and he's unable to walk, and the fairies kind of do not help them, and there's like a lot of bad in their world, in the human world, and they don't associate with the fairies. The fairies are bad. And Farah goes hunting one day, and she does it every day, so it's not like something new for her, to provide meat for her family so that they could survive. And on this special day, a deer comes into her sights, but then a wolf does too. And she needs to decide, does she shoot the deer and have food for her family, or does she shoot the wolf and not only have food for her family, but the pelt to sell so that she makes some sort of money, right? And provides for her family even more. So she chooses to shoot the wolf. She skins the wolf, she takes it into play, and later on she realizes that she skinned a fairy, and this man can transform into a wolf. And a gentleman named Tamlin is not happy. So he comes and gives Farah an ultimatum: die or come with him as punishment for killing his friend. And so she does that. And this series is so freaking good. I am so ready for the next book. I'm so invested. And Sarah Maas, love you, but you're taking your damn good time. But this is a, never-ending story as of now. We're really not sure how many books we're going to get from Sarah J. Maas. Like I said, we're on 4 main books, 1 novella, but you can consider it 5. Some people don't. But this series is just so great. We follow Farah for a while, and then we switch Pobs, but this is just such a great series, and it is so heartwarming, heartbreaking, intense, insane, loving series. And Farah is one of those characters where she finds herself, and it's a found family type of read. Staying on the Sarah J. Maas train, we're moving on to Throne of Glass. And if you have read any sort of book, you have heard about this, especially if you're on Book Talk. And this is the holy grail of Sarah J. Maas. This is the first series she's ever written, and we're gonna get into the depths of this because Sarah J. Maas, her mind is just beautiful. So let's just get into what Throne of Glass is about. Throne of Glass is about a girl named Selena, and she is a spy, and she lives her life doing this. She's paying off her debts. That's her goal. And she slowly falls in love with an individual she works with, and she has a dark secret, and actually an awesome secret, and she lives her life knowing this secret can affect so many things, and she finally learns to believe in herself thanks to someone special, and she crushes the world, and she is a fucking god. And this series is insane. And I know that's so out of context and so random to say, but you just have to read the series to understand. And again, this is an 8-book series, and let me just say, they are not light. They are super heavy. It took me a while, almost like a month and a half, to get through this whole entire series. And I'm the type of person that when I start a series, I have to completely finish it before I could start anywhere else other than reading standalones on my Kindle. But this series absolutely crushed me. It is the best series. You bawl your eyes out 90% of the time, but it is an awesome freaking series. This is just, let's go into Sarah J. Maas's mind, right? She wrote this book first, ACOTAR next, Crescent City next, right? So there's 3 separate series. But not only that, but somehow, some way, all these worlds are interconnected. And I won't go into deep depth detail, because that is just something that I will never spoil for anyone. But let's just say all of her series, even though they're separate series from each other, there's connections. And you just come so attached to all these characters, and when you see that interconnection happen, you're just like, it just is I don't know. This series is just so darn good, and I understand it's super intimidating, but to not live your life and never read a Throne of Glass series is just a sad life to me. But this series is just everything to me. I loved ACOTAR. Loved it. My friend recommended it to me. She was like, this is my favorite series of all time. And then we buddy read Throne of Glass series. This is my favorite Sarah J. Maas series, and this is considered YA. Like, it is, there's no romance to it, no nothing. But there's like explicit scenes of like fighting and descriptions and whatever else. This is the best series that Sarah J. Maas has ever wrote in her whole entire life. I stand by that. This is the best series I have ever read in my life. I love this series. You have to read this. If you take nothing else from this video and you just want to read one big long series, Throne of Glass is the one. Throne of Glass. Next up is Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the From Blood and Ash series, and there is a series before this. I believe this is a 5-book series. It is so good. This follows Poppy, who is a veiled woman. She is supposed to save them by doing the right, and every couple years someone is sacrificed to the right, and they get these powers, and they're these changed individuals, and truth comes out that they aren't as they seem, and there's a lot of lies and deceit. But Poppy has a scar down her face, and she's considered ugly to people, and Castiel, who is one of the guards, does not think so, and he is now her guard, and she gets to experience life with Castiel. But Castiel has some deep, dark secrets, and this series is just so good. This is a very smutty series. I think it falls in the realm of ACOTAR smut, but maybe a little more unhinged. Castiel is a badass, but Poppy ends up being so as well later in the story. At first, she really just needs to learn her confidence and herself, and that's the hardest part, is that a lot of people beat her down throughout this whole series, and Castiel brings her back up, and this series is so good. It took me forever to pick this up for whatever reason, and when I finally did, it was so good. Now, there's another I think it's from Flesh and Fire. That series is also very well. I actually have not read the last book because I do not want the series to end, and I'm having a really hard time letting it end. But I absolutely love this series. Blood and Ash is such a great way if you're more in tune with, you know, YA and then your smut and all these deep political standpoints in series that are just so good. This is a very intricate series, a very big series. I think each book is around 700 pages, but it is such a great story. And again, this is something that you should pick up later down the road. This is not something you should pick up immediately and be like, this is the first book I'm going to read, and I've never read more than 200 pages, 300 page romance book. This is not for you. But to start off, again, start slow, work your way up. This series is just so intense, so insane, so captivating, so loving, so crazy. And when you get towards the end of the series, you'll understand, like, I love Castiel. He is like one of my top book boyfriends in the fantasy world, and he just like, he's just life-changing. I love him. This series is so darn good, and Poppy's a great character. A lot of times I don't like the FMCs in some of these fantasy books because it's always damsel in distress, and I love a badass character, and I think that's why I love Throne of Glass so much. But from Blood and Ash, Poppy gets there. With time, she gets there, and this story is so good. Lastly, for big book series, this series is something that I have yet to finish, but I absolutely love it. This is the Zodiac Academy. This is a, I think, 9-book series minus the separate stories that go in between and then the separate world that attaches to this series. This is a very big world to be in, and this is why I saved it for last, because I think in total there's like 15 or 16 altogether connected world books that go together in this series, and I'm only on book number 7 right now, I believe, or 8, and it is just an intense world to be in. This story is about 2 sisters who live in the human world, and their whole lives had no idea that they were the lost princesses in this Zodiac Academy world. And the professor comes and gets them and tells them, you know, you need to come with me and we need you here. And things start to take a turn because they show up and no one is happy, because the rightful heirs, as of now, do not want to give up their spot. And they can care less about being the princesses. They just want to live a different life and experience something new and challenge themselves, because now they're discovering they could have powers and all these things, and their lives weren't all that great beforehand. They lived in a studio apartment together where they kind of just lived to make ends meet, and now they get to live in a castle and, you know, experience this new life of power and excitement and actually go to school and do all these things, and they feel like they found a place in the world, but the heirs do not make it easy for them. And this series is unmatched. It is feral. It is fun. It is crazy. The things that you think are gonna happen, because you're used to some of these fantasy books where like you're like, oh my god, like I know they're gonna end up together, I know these things will be. No, these girls just make decisions for themselves. They don't give a shit about anybody else. And it actually had me like like I remember, like, you know where you're reading and you sit up like this, like that is how I was throughout this whole entire series. Every time you get to the last few chapters of the book, you have to immediately start the next book because shit hits the fan hard every time. I haven't not been stressed about this series, and unfortunately I haven't been able to pick up a fantasy book since Onyx Storm, but I am absolutely loving this series so far as I'm reading it. And honestly, it just, Zodiac Academy is so cool. Like, it's just such a cool world. And again, this is such a huge series to start. So if you're not like advanced in fantasy, definitely wouldn't recommend picking this up right away because it might really stress you out and deter you away from fantasy books. But if you are, you know, a seasoned fantasy individual and have not picked up Zodiac Academy yet, this is the book series for you. Next up is standalone fantasy books. I believe Phantasma is going to be a multiple book series, but it follows different characters, so that's why I'm considering this kind of like a standalone. This story is about a girl named Ophelia, and her sister end up inheriting magic, and they decide that they're going to pay off their debts, but the way to do it is not how Ophelia wants to do it, but her sister runs off and joins Phantasma, which is similar to like a carnival that comes to town, but if you win, you win a lot of money. And her sister runs off to do this, and Ophelia is pissed, so she follows her, and Ophelia meets a phantom. And this is described to be kind of similar to like Danny Phantom, but adult version. There is, you know, explicit content in this series, but it is super good. I absolutely loved it. The format style is similar to Carvel by Stephanie Garber, I think. And although I did not really like Carvel by Stephanie Garber, Phantasma was great. This is by Kaylee Smith. And again, it's a standalone. I consider it that because, again, the next books are not going to follow the same characters, I believe. So this series, super good. Again, she's thick. So for a standalone, though, under 500 pages, pretty good. This series is super fun. It actually made me cry a little bit. And it's just super lighthearted. I think the Phantom is super funny, and I love him throughout this. But this series is super good. Next for standalones is Ali Hazelwood Bride. This is, I believe, actually turning into a series. I don't know if it's going to be just a duology. The next book, it's called Mate, and I think it does follow the next, but as of now, it was supposed to be a standalone, so we're going to act like it is. Ali Hazelwood writes Bride. This story is about a vampire who is supposed to be married to a wolf. It's an arranged marriage story. The wolves and, well, werewolves and the vampires do not get along, and this is supposed to be a marriage of alliance for both sides of families, and they start off by hating each other, and this series gets crazy, and it is such a great book. This is Ali Hazelwood's first ever fantasy written book, and I think she did a great job. I absolutely love this story, and all I gotta say is not. That's all you need to know because the story was fucking wild, but Bride by Ali Hazelwood, so darn good. I absolutely loved this story. Amazing. Thank you guys so much for joining me today to discuss fantasy books and where to start. You know, I think that's one of the biggest thing is that a lot of the times we talk about fantasy books on Book Talk or YouTube, and it can be super overwhelming to decide, you know, where do I begin? And I just think that this is the best guide. Again, I got thrown into fantasy just super quick because I was in a I want to read more about dragons type of thing because I finished Game of Thrones and House of Dragons at the time. And so reading Fourth Wing right off the bat probably wasn't the best way to do it because there's slower ways to get into fantasy. But again, I hope this guide was super helpful. And again, I think that we can go into more in detail about how fantasy is, and I feel like there's no real way to start fantasy. Again, it is an overwhelming genre, especially if the world is super intricate like Sarah J. Maas's world. So I think that this is a good way to start it. YA is always the way to go because the books are usually a trilogy or duology, so they're shorter. But as you get into your fantasy era, you know, getting into a Sarah J. Maas world or a Rebecca Yarros world is sometimes great too. So I hope this guide was super helpful, and yeah, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.